Today we're going to be looking at Excel 2013, Lessons 8 and 9. And for the most part, what we're going to be dealing with is copying and pasting Excel and some of the things that are unique to Excel as it relates to copying and pasting. So the first thing we'll do is you do your standard cut, copy, paste. We're going to talk about something called a paste values and when you might use that. We're going to use the insert function tool to add some functions to our spreadsheet. We'll use the format painter to copy the look of cells rather than the actual information. And then we're going to get into something called absolute and relative referencing. And so in this section we're going to take a look at relative references and what they are. Those are typically your friend and something that you want to do. But we're going to talk about an absolute reference and when we might need to use that. The next topic deals with inserting and deleting of rows as well as columns, hiding and unhiding rows and columns, and then finally we're going to take a look at something called transposing data. Now to do the exercises in this book, we're going to turn in our book to page 404. So we're here in Lesson 8. We're going to go to page 404. And on this page, we're going to open this Excel file that is the E08 try file. Now alternatively, if you're in the classroom, you can simply go to Class Files, IIT, Excel, Chapter 1, and open up that E08 try file from the document. With the file open, we're going to save the file, Save As. We're going to redirect this to our Documents folder. And then we're going to create a new folder with today's date. So I'm going to type in today's date. Open that folder up. And adding our initials to the end of this file, E08 try and our initials. That will save that file for safekeeping so that we can upload it to NGrade later. Now, in Excel, we have a formula here in cell H5. Now let's take a look for a second at what this formula is. Looking at the formula bar, it's B5 minus B11. Okay, so it's taken B5 and it subtracts the B11 cell. Now, this formula is in the wrong place. Where it's really supposed to go is it's supposed to go in cell E5. Now, there's a problem though if we do a standard copy and paste. Guys, you don't want to do this right now. I'm just demonstrating where the problem can come in. I'm going to copy this. I'm going to come over here and paste it in. Notice that there is an error message, this ref error message, and if you look on the formula bar, there is this error message. Now later in today's lesson we're going to talk about what is causing that problem, but for now what we want to do is we want to talk about how do I move this from one place to the other, keeping the formula intact. Well, the one way is regular move, which is a cut and paste. So with my cursor here in cell H5, I'm going to use the cut command to cut that formula out of that place. And in cell E5, I'm going to paste it in place. When I do a cut and paste, it will preserve the formula as it was before and just move the results to cell E5. The next thing we want to do is we're going to take the titles that are at the top of this and we're going to copy those titles to another spot in the document. So I'm going to select from A3 to E4. Again, pointing in the middle of A3, selecting to E4. I don't want to get rid of this I simply want to copy it. So I'm going to click on the copy button here. And the place that they want us to copy this is going to be cell A13. So I've clicked in cell A13, and now I'm going to go ahead and paste the information in at that location. Now we're going to copy some more data. This is the data that we're going to copy right over here. But before we do that, I want you to look in cell B11. And I want you to notice that there is a formula in cell B11. It's a formula called a median. We'll talk about that at a later time. But for right now, I just want you to notice that there is a formula there. Now at this point, what we're going to do is we're going to select from A5 to C11. So pointing here from A5, I'm going to select down to C11. What I want to do is I want to copy this data. Look where I want the data to go, and that's cell A15 into cell A15. But instead of doing a standard paste, we're going to click the drop down on paste, because what we're going to do is we're going to do something called paste values. Paste values. Now if we come down here to the corresponding cell to B11, which is B21, and we look up at the formula bar, notice that we no longer see a formula. The number is kind of the same. It's rounded. Okay, the one up here is rounded to the nearest whole number. This one isn't. Okay, but if we did round this to the nearest whole number, they would be this number. So that it is the same number, if you will. The difference is it doesn't have the formula here. And basically, that's what paste values does. Is it copies the information from one place, pastes it into another, but if there are any formulas in the original, it eliminates those formulas and only puts the results in. As such, it does not become a live formula. If I change, for example, just to demonstrate this, if I change this number to 3,000, watch how this number changes. Okay, this number changed. But, and I'm going to undo that, if I come down and I change this number to 3,000, this number is not going to change. And the reason why this number did not change is because there's no formula here. It is just the number typed in. Now I'm going to undo so that I preserve my original numbers. The next thing we're going to do is we're going to enable something called text wrapping, which we've done before. And so I'm going to do that on cells A4 through E4. But I also want to do it for cells A14 through E14. So I'm going to hold down my control key and select those cells on row 14. Now I'm going to come up and use my text wrap tool. Turn that on so that the text in those cells is going to be wrapped. And let's look in cell D5 for just a moment, cell D5. And in this cell, we see a formula that divides two numbers, B5 and C5. What this does is it tells me how much money approximately each account is worth for this salesperson. Now, what we're going to do is I want to copy this formula down to D10. Well, as we've learned about in a previous class, with my cursor here in cell D5, I can use my fill handle. And if I point at this fill handle and I drag this down to cell D10, It copies the formula down. Now, here's what I want you to observe. Please go to cell D6. I want you to notice that the formula for D6 divides numbers that are on B6 and C6. D7 divides number from B7 to C7. D8, B8, and C8. So hopefully you're seeing a pattern that's happening here to where the information is on the same row, and when we divide numbers that are on the same row and copy that kind of formula down, no problem. Now let's take a look at the formula here in cell E5. The formula in cell E5 is the formula B5 minus B11. Notice in this case that the formula does not subtract numbers that are both on row 5. Okay? It's subtracting a number from row 5 from a number that's on row 11, or vice versa. Now, let's watch what happens when we use this fill handle to copy down. When I use the fill handle to copy down, I do get an error message here. And let's take a look at the formula here. The formula here takes B6, okay, that's this number right here, B6, and it subtracts B12. Well, notice that B12 is a blank cell. This isn't what we wanted it to do. We wanted this to subtract B6 from B11. Okay? In other words, going back to the original formula, B5, when I copy it down, I want it to change to B6 and B7 and B8. But that B11, that's pointing to a number that's not on the row that I'm on, and consequently I don't want that number to change when my formula gets copied from one cell to the next. This is called an absolute reference. In other words, what I want to do is I want to modify this formula so that the B11 never changes when it gets copied. Here's the quick way to make this happen. If you click on cell B11, and on your keyboard, press the F4 key. The F4 key. When you do that, you will see two $ appearing on the screen, on the formula. These $ make this an absolute reference. Alright? What that means is that when this formula gets copied, the B5 is going to be allowed to change from one cell to the next, but the B11 is not going to change. Now I'm going to press the Enter key to lock this in place. Let's go back to cell E5, and what I'm going to do now is I'm going to recopy this formula. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to point at that fill handle. I'm going to copy this new formula down, dragging it down the same number of cells that we did before. Notice this time we don't have an error. But more importantly, let's go to cell E6 and let's take a look at the formula. E6 does show that it was changed to B6, but it's still subtracting B11. Going to the next row down, it's subtracting B7, because now I'm on row 7, so I do want to look at number 7, B7, but it's still subtracting from B11 from B7, and that's exactly what I want to do. Going down to the last one, B10 minus B11. So this is an absolute reference that did this for us. When you're working with an absolute reference versus a relative reference, there's an easy way to spot them on the spreadsheet. When you're looking at a formula If there are no dollar signs, 0, then you have a relative reference. You should put that in your notebook. If, however, you look at a formula and there are 2 dollar signs, one in front of the letter, one in front of the number, then you have an absolute reference. That should also be in your notebook. So a relative reference has 0 dollar signs. An absolute reference has 2 dollar signs. Now, there is such thing as a mixed reference, which has 1 dollar sign, but that gets much more confusing than this already is, and it does not appear on your certification exam until you get to the advanced level. So at this point, we're just going to deal with absolute reference and relative reference. Last things we're going to do here is I'm going to apply a look to my row 4. So I'm going to select from A4 to E4, and I'm going to use my fill color drop down, and I'm just going to pick this first option right here, gold, accent 4, lighter 80%. And once I've selected that, that will apply that look to that text. And I'm also going to make the text bold. Now, I wish to apply the same look down on row 14. Now, obviously, I could go through the exact same steps that I just did and repeat them down here. But I want to remind you of something we learned about in Word, and that's this format painter. It works the same way it did in Word. So with A4 through E4 still selected, I'm going to click on my format painter. Then I'm going to come down and click on, and now a lot of people will try to select from A14 to E14. That might work, but what I know works is to click right on cell A14. Because I selected 5 cells up here, when I do my format painter and I click on the first cell, it's going to copy 5 cells to the right as well. At this point, that's going to bring us to the end of this particular lesson. So let's save our work, clicking on the Save button. And once you've done that, you can close out of this file, and we're going to move now to Lesson 9. Now, Chapter 9 has got some similar features of what we talked about in Lesson 8, and we're going to be talking about techniques for moving data around, which we've taken a brief look at already, but we're going to look at again. We're going to go to page 411, in the book, and then from here I could open up this Excel file right here, and that should open up E09 try. Again, if you have your if you're in the classroom, you can go to Class Files, IIT, Excel, and Chapter 1, and then we can find the Chapter 9 E09 try file and open that file up. Once that file's been opened, we can save it, File, Save As. We can put it in our dated folder that we created earlier in the lesson and add our initials to the end of that file name. Alright, with this file open, we're going to begin with something that should be review, and that is here on the first row, row 1. I want to take this sales review and I want to merge and center it across some cells. So we're going to select from A1 over to E1, from A1 to E1, and I want to merge and center sales review onto the center of those cells. As you take a look at this spreadsheet, you're going to see that there's information for December, January, and March. Okay? Well, that's a little odd. Number one, they've skipped February, and it's not typical where they're going to include both December and January information. Normally, December's for the year before, January's for the current year. So here's what we want to do. We want to hide column B. I'm not deleting it. I want to keep it available so that I can do calculations on it, but I want to hide it. Well, if you're going to hide a row, you want to select a row. If you want to hide, and I used the wrong term. I said row when I should have said column. If you're going to hide a column, you need to select the column. So I click on the letter B. If it was a row I was wanting to hide, I would click on it by clicking on the number. But in this case, we are selecting column B. And I can do this from the menu by going up to this Format button on the Home tab. Clicking on Format, there is the options of hiding or unhiding rows or columns. I'm going to choose to hide this column. Now, if you'll notice on the top of the spreadsheet, it goes from A to C. That's because column B, while it's still here, is hidden. And so it's hidden the letter as well. Now, what I want to do is I want to insert a column in between January and March. Now, one thing that you will want to make a note of is that whenever Excel inserts, it will typically insert either to the left of my cursor or above my cursor. So if I'm inserting columns, I want to be on cell D if I want to create a new column D. So with column D selected, I'm going to come up to the Insert button because I'm inserting stuff in. And I'm going to click on the drop down. I'm not inserting cells, I'm inserting columns, inserting sheet columns. A new column has been added. I can now type what I want the header of this column to be. I'm in cell D3, and I'm going to type in February and press the Enter key. Now we're going to type in some numbers here. The first number is going to be, this is in cell D4, it's going to be 8282. Pressing the Enter key to move down to the next cell. It's going to be 9087, 9087. Pressing the Enter key. The next number is going to be 1010, followed by 443. Pressing Enter. The next cell, 9731. And the final one, cell D8, is going to be 8367. 8367. You will notice that there is a total column for each, or row, a total row for each of these. And in all honesty, I could copy the formula over, but a better practice for a new skill that we've looked at before but haven't practiced much is the ability to create a sum, an addition of these cells. With my cursor here in cell D9, I'm going to come up to my Autosum button. Click on Autosum. I'm now looking at this dotted line and asking myself, is this dotted line surrounding the numbers that I wish to add? And they are. Those are the numbers I wish to add. Press the Enter key to lock that in place. Now for cell D10, it's asking me to average these numbers. It wants me to average these numbers. Well, I can actually do an average much in the same way as I did a sum. I start just like before, where I put my cursor where I want the answer to go. In this case, cell D10. With my cursor in cell D10, I'm going to once again come up to Autosum. But this time, instead of clicking the button itself, which is what we've done in the past, we're going to use the drop-down arrow to the right of the button. Here, not only can I sum, which is the default setting for this button, I can also do something called average. What this is going to do is calculate an average of a group of numbers. So I'm going to click on average. Now, as I did with the sum, what I need to do is look at the dotted line and ask myself, are these the numbers that I wish to average? The answer in this case is no. Alright? What is the reason for the no in this case? Hopefully, you answered that you do not want to average this 45, 9, 10 because that's the total of the group of numbers. So what I want to do is I'm going to take my mouse to number and I'm going to drag my mouse down to the 8367 number. So again, I've pointed to 8282 and I've dragged down to 8363, and that will change where those numbers are appearing. So I've selected the numbers that I do want to average, so I'm now done, so I'm going to press the Enter key. And that will calculate the average of the February numbers. Now, we've added in the February column, but now let's take a look at adding in a row. I wish to add a new row, and this new row I want to be between 7 and 8. Well, if I want to put a new row in between 7 and 8, what I'm going to do is I'm going to click on the number 8. The reason for this is earlier I mentioned that Excel always inserts either to the left or above my current cursor. So since this is going to go above, I want to select row 8. And with row 8 selected, I'm going to come up to my Insert button. I'm going to click on the drop down for Insert and insert Sheet Rows. I now have a new row entered in. I'm clicking on cell A8 and I'm going to type in the name of this person whose name is Vegas, V-E-G-A-S. Now I wish to move across, so instead of pressing the Enter key, what key should I press? Hopefully you said the Tab key. Alright, now for the month of January, we're going to type in 8042, press the Tab key, type in 6639, press Tab, and type in 8088. Now the last number, we're going to actually do a calculation. I want to add these numbers up. So, I'm going to use my Autosum button. Because I want to add, I can click right on the button. I don't have to click the drop down. So I'm going to click on the button, and it's going to sum, are these the numbers I wish to add up? The numbers I wish to add up. I wish to add up the numbers to the left. And I'm going to drag my mouse to cell E8. That puts the dotted lines around the numbers that I do want to add, changing my formula accordingly. So I'm now done. I press Enter. I'm going to save my work. Not quite done yet, but we're getting close. The final thing we're going to do is something called a transpose. And what a transpose does is when it flips the rows and the columns around. In my presentation here, I've got the names coming down the A column, and I've got the months coming across row 3. Now, sometimes you get into a situation where you want to kind of flip that, where maybe for whatever reason I want the names to go across the top and I want the months to appear down the side. Well, rather than retyping or trying to copy and paste everything in, Microsoft Excel does make a quick way to do this, and it's called the transpose feature. Now, to make this happen, we need to select the items that we wish to transpose. So for this, I'm going to select from A3 to E9. Generally speaking, you don't want to transpose your calculation values. If you wish to do some calculations after you've done the transpose, you can then regenerate or recreate those calculations. So I've selected from A3 to E9. I'm going to copy this. I'm going to use my copy button. Some of you right-click and copy. That would be fine. Now I need to tell Excel where to transpose this data to. Where should I put this new data? And for that, we're going to come down here to cell A13. Cell A13. And we're going to paste but we're going to do a special kind of paste. Normally, I would just do a regular paste, which would be this button right here. But if I go to the very last button in this same group, it says transpose. And so I'm going to click on that transpose button. And what that does is it does copy and paste the data in. But notice that now the months appear down the left-hand side, and the names appear across the top. Okay, which is exactly what we were wanting to do. I wanted to switch this around so that the names would be on the top and the months would be on the left-hand side. So we have successfully transposed our data from one way of displaying it to another way of displaying it. I'm going to save my work. That does bring us to a conclusion of this particular lesson. So I'm going to close this file and take a look at the things that we've talked about. In this lesson, we took a quick look at this simple cut, copy, and paste feature. We looked at a feature called paste values, which allows us to copy numbers that might have been created from a formula and paste them in just as their numbers themselves. We actually skipped over the insert function tool. We simply used the Autosum tool to add the functions in that we needed. We did look at the format painter. We talked about relative reference and absolute reference. Relative reference, you may remember, has $0. Absolute reference have $2 in the formula. And we're going to be taking more looks at this in the near future. We showed you how to insert rows and columns. Didn't actually delete, but we could have used the delete button to do the same thing. And we took a look at hiding rows and columns as well, to be able to remove them from view. And then the final thing we looked at was the ability to transpose our data. And that basically takes the things that were in the columns and puts them in the rows, and takes the things that were in the rows and puts them into columns.